Welcome to our podcast. This is another recorded episode of Stay Classy San Diego, with video production and studio provided by MaxLux Media, sponsored by Dorada Nutrition, with your host being myself, Steve Wire, a freelance reporter. This podcast is dedicated to fostering quality dialogue surrounding all things local policy related in North County, San Diego. Join us weekly as we interview political leaders, analysts, professionals, and community members on issues ranging from homelessness to housing density to elections. All right, well, today we bring into the studio Melanie Burkholder. Melanie is the Carlsbad City Council District 1 representative, serving from 2022 to 2026. She's a resident and business owner in Carlsbad, operating successful counseling practice in the city. In addition to working as a mental health counselor, Melanie formerly worked as a Secret Service agent. She is on the SANDAG Board of Directors, as well as the City Council Legislative Subcommittee. She is also incredibly involved in the community, giving her time to the Carlsbad High Noon Rotary, the Carlsbad Chamber of Commerce, the Parent Association of North County, and more. Melanie received her master's at the University of Memphis and her PhD at the International Institute of Christian Counseling. So thanks for coming on the show, Melanie. Really appreciate your time. I was looking forward to this episode because this is sort of the first Carlsbad specific episode that we've actually done for the show. And so one thing that I wanted to talk about is you've been on the job for 3 months now, give or take, and you have obviously certain things that you ran on, but now that you're in the office, I wanted to talk a bit about sort of how it compares to your expectations or what the learning curve has been like and some of the goals that you have. So,
well, Steve, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. I have to back up just a little bit.
Sure.
I'm first and foremost a mom and a wife, and those are my first and most important roles, regardless of what else I do in my life. So I appreciate the warm introduction, and thank you so much for that. But it's very different, especially in California, where it takes about a month to count votes. So typically, if we have an election day, like it's November 3rd, then we know who's elected on November 3rd. But in California, because of the way that we vote, we can vote by mail, we can vote in person, we can vote early. There's 3 different paths to get your vote cast, right? And I'm a Republican, and Republicans typically like to show up on voting day and get their sticker and say, I voted. One of the challenges that presents for folks like us is that it takes longer to count the votes. And in a close race, it can take longer for the city to declare a clear winner because they have to be very careful before they say, okay, this is the winner. And so for me, I didn't start onboarding, and we can talk about the whole when you vote thing, if you want to bring that up too, because I think that's a very big educational piece just for the general public that we can talk about. But for me, I didn't start onboarding with the city until around November 29th. So that was a long time after the votes were cast. And the reason that happens is it takes a long time to get them counted. As a candidate, yes, I ran on opposing the mileage tax, which I think we're going to talk about a little bit later as well. Mm-hmm. I ran on cleaning up homelessness. District 1 is the village of Carlsbad, includes the village of Carlsbad in the barrio. That is where the homeless population is concentrated in Carlsbad. And I ran on public safety. You know, we are currently in a state of emergency for traffic in Carlsbad. In March of 2021, I have 2 teenage boys, and I was carting them to school back and forth every day, noticing this influx of e-bikes, and very scary. I drive a Suburban, so it's like a bus. And just noticing the potential for accidents and how the community could be impacted there, I went to the council and I read the California Code on e-bike safety. And I said, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We just need to enforce what's already on the books. So because I could see someone's going to get hurt. This is not safe. And in my district, one of the elementary schools, the middle school, and the high school are all within right by each other. I would say maybe a quarter mile of each other. The high school, the middle school and the elementary are next door to each other. So you can imagine there's a lot of traffic there with e-bikes. And so e-bike safety was a big concern of mine, and many other people. Thank God that we sort of just stepped up and said, hey, this is really a concern of ours. So Carlsbad Police Department did a great job of getting out and starting to educate parents, e-bikers, e-bike riders, e-bike owners, and the community, drivers and pedestrians alike, that these are sort of the concerns that we have, and this is how we all travel together in whatever mode we travel. The problem is with traffic safety, you actually have three pedestals of the stool, for example. So you have the education, you also have the engineering, and you also have the enforcement. And at that time, education was the sole focus. Fast forward to August of 2022 rather, we lost someone in an e-bike car collision. Horrible, horrific, terrible accident that nobody wants to see happen. As a result, the city pivoted, and again, I'm not elected. I'm still running for office at this time. The city pivoted and decided to do all three prongs of the stool. So now we're doing enforcement, education, and engineering. Engineering would be what you see on the stripes in the road of this is the bike lane. And education, obviously, we launched a Safer Streets Together campaign where we're trying to get buy-in from the citizenry to say, yes, we will put a sign in our yard that says, slow down, Carlsbad. We will abide by the rules. We will notice bikers and pedestrians alike. And the relationship is symbiotic. Everybody does that, right? And we will enforce traffic laws. So those three things have definitely improved the situation in Carlsbad with regard to safety. But those are the things that you don't necessarily know when you're running for office. I was trying to run on a common sense platform. Hey, I see that this could be a problem. Let's be ahead of it and not, responsive. Let's be an advocate and get this worked out. So that's one of the things that I think is different than when you're elected. You know that you get briefings, obviously, from the staff members and in each department about what's going on. So obviously, with CPD, I did find out now. Oh, guess what? Now we're doing a program where Carlsbad Police Department is working with Carlsbad Unified School District to provide the training for e-bikers, students, that will then result in potentially a decal or something on the vehicle, on the bike, that allows the student to park on campus if they've completed that safety course. And with the enforcement part of it, if they do get cited, the students are allowed, or whoever, they might not be a student, whoever gets cited is allowed to go through a safety course to make their ticket cured. Otherwise, there's a fine associated with that. So we're doing some innovative things around it. I mean, we really had an influx of e-bikes. And in fact, my two boys got them for Christmas this year. They're 14 and 15 years old. So, but I also think about parents. I'm a parent. I think about that. Like when I gave them a cell phone, I said, here you go. This could be used as a tool or as a weapon. If it's used as a tool, that's fine. If it's used as a weapon, it comes back to me. And I had them sign a safety agreement and all of these ways of how they were going to use their phone for good and not for bad. Because if we know anything through the pandemic, kids sat on their phones and really absorbed a lot of information that wasn't necessarily good for them. And on the other side of it came out not for the better.
So I wanted to talk a bit about, in relation to, so you talked about the traffic emergency, and I think that when you talk about traffic, at least in Encinitas, which is the city I cover mostly, the conversation with traffic goes hand in hand with the conversation around development, because people are concerned all along our coastal areas about how the additional development coming from state affordable housing mandates is going to impact traffic, infrastructure, those sort of things. So educate me a bit on terms of the conversation in Carlsbad right now, like how essentially is the conversation going between the relationship between development and traffic, and sort of like what are your concerns in relation to how housing development, additional infill development, is going to impact traffic and infrastructure in the city?
I think that is a really good question, because a lot of people, I think Encinitas is a great example too of somebody that doesn't really have a plan for that. But in Carlsbad, developers pay impact fees when they bring a project forward, and one of those fees is relative to traffic flow, right? We want to be able to move people, move vehicles, move people, and we are a very well laid out city. We have a great general plan, we have a great master plan, we have a great traffic and mobility plan, and we have a commission that actually oversees all of the projects that's going on or coming before the council for us to approve or not approve. So we have layers of protection in place. And it's funny that you mentioned that, because we actually are going to be hearing an issue in my district at Tamarack and Carlsbad Boulevard, which is the 101. Mm-hmm. So Tamarack is really an arterial street, because it's in between El Camino, the 5, and Carlsbad Boulevard. So lots of people go through there. And the issue is there are a couple of options. We need to update the intersection, no doubt about it. But one of the options is a roundabout in that intersection. Well, on the other side of Carlsbad Boulevard is the ocean. Mm-hmm. And tailing off Tamarack goes right into a state parking lot, which is incredibly busy, as you can imagine, in the summertime, even in for locals in off times. So we've been getting the city council and the city has been getting a lot of feedback from residents in that area where they don't want a roundabout. They prefer the traffic lighting that is there, and you know, I listened to all of that. I listened to the traffic engineer. I listened to the director of that. And, you know, we are so conditioned, just humanly conditioned to do certain things when we're behind the wheel of the vehicle. And one of those is to stop at stop signs. Well, when we put in flashing lights all along Carlsbad Boulevard for crosswalks, that people can push the button and they flash, that means cars are supposed to stop to let pedestrians cross. It took a while to get people, drivers, conditioned to stop at those. And my thought process is the same with a roundabout, that it might take people a while to get used to that, but it's not the Carlsbad residents that I worry about getting used to that. It's people that are visiting. And, you know, tourism is one of our top attractions in Carlsbad. Sure. So I don't necessarily think the citizenry couldn't figure that out. I worry about everybody else that's coming to visit Carlsbad and maintaining that safety that is fundamentally government's role and our role as city council members, and that is in my district. So it's you know, multi-layer worry for me that this works out fine. So obviously one of the other options is to maintain a traffic signal, but just reconfigure some stuff and render it more safe, and also move people. So I think we're going to eventually come to a happy medium on that, but traffic is a big thing. And when you remember, maybe in, what year was that, when we had 5 fires burning in the county, and Carlsbad was heavily impacted. I had a kid in preschool at the time, so it's been a minute. But it was incredible to witness in real time what some of our limitations are on moving people. And part of that has to do with the 578 corridor that has not been improved, that the voters voted to improve, and SANDAG has not done what they said they were going to do. So moving people is very important, and we do have transit, obviously, in my village. Not my village, but in the village, there's a stop, and at Poinsettia, there's a stop. And the challenge with that is that there are time constraints on when you can get to work or when you can get home or when you can go to a San Diego Padres game and they don't have service home or whatever. So the service level isn't really there to support density in that area. And the village and barrio is a very unique area of Carlsbad, which is provides a lot of opportunity, I should say.
Sure. And I do want to talk about transit in a minute, but before I get to that, there's been a recent debate in Carlsbad going on over objective design standards. Yes. And this is something that you were actually quoted in a Coast News article about fairly recently, in which you voiced some concerns over these standards, which are expected to be adopted by, I think, sometime in the summer. And there's another meeting coming up for the City Council in April over the issue. But the standards will be considered as an amendment to the city's Village and Barrio Master Plan. And I think that there's this worry from some residents that Adopting these standards will lead to more stack and pack, on infill developments. So what is your position on these standards? Like in our article recently, you actually talked about, or not my article, but the article that one of my colleagues wrote, you mentioned that that we're going to have less oversight, this is going to open up the floodgates. What did you mean by that? Sort of explain like why these standards could be problematic in terms of opening up the floodgates, as it were.
Yeah, let's go back a little bit and talk about the fact that we do have a master plan for Carlsbad, and when we take that to Sacramento, Sacramento says essentially, that's really cute, Carlsbad, we don't care. So we have, a max build out in our heads about what we can maintain infrastructure-wise, public safety-wise, and all of the things that we need to have, wastewater, all of that. So Sacramento doesn't care about that. What they care about is housing numbers. And so they tell us we have to have the RHNA numbers, regional housing numbers. This is how many we have to have. And unfortunately, we've had very inconsistent leadership in District 1 in Carlsbad. So we didn't have someone saying, wait a minute, why are we absorbing the lion's share of these numbers when in fact one of our main goals is a community beachy feel with very limited slow growth kind of thing. And I'm in that as far as let's make this make sense. But when Sacramento says we don't care if it makes sense for you, then we're stuck having to deal with it. So with the RHNA numbers that we have to absorb, we wanted to protect the village and barrio as much as we could. Traditionally, projects go through the Planning Commission, which is 7 commissioners made up of residents that are volunteers, and developers will go through that process, and if it gets a stamp from them, it will come to the council, and the council will approve or not the development, and then the developer can appeal if we don't approve it for whatever reason. With the village and barrio, one of the previous council members decided that that area was so important and so unique, and I 100% agree with that statement. It is so unique compared to the rest of the city that they wanted additional oversight. So additional oversight meant that the projects came to the council. It wasn't a planning commission thing. And then if residents wanted to challenge a development, then they didn't have to pay the fee. There is a fee. I think it's something like $800 if you want to challenge a development. So if a development gets passed by the Planning Commission, the City Council, you can still challenge it in Districts 2, 3, and 4. In District 1, you can in the village and barrio, you can challenge it, but you don't have to pay the fee. So that's part of this whole ordeal. So we do have a certified housing element in Carlsbad, which is something that we wanted to do to protect, maybe oversight's a good word, so that we had some input into what was going on into the city. And so I think I have the note here, our housing element is kind of funny because we sort of compete with Encinitas a little bit, and I think that's cute because you're, but our housing element was, Encinitas and Carlsbad were approved on the same day, July 13th, 2021. But see, where Carlsbad said alphabet C comes before E, so we can obviously say we were first.
Sure.
But the housing element is essentially is in compliance with what the state wants us to do to get to those RHNA numbers. With having a housing element, certified housing element, the city council, not under my leadership, but the city council had decided to direct staff to come up with the objective design standards. With objective design standards, it could be maybe 5 different architectural types. Obviously, all of the setbacks and all of the height restrictions, those are all set. That's not different in an objective design standard. Basically, all it's doing is saying, we accept these, for number's sake, 5 different designs.
Yeah.
If a developer comes in and those 5 or those boxes are checked, let's say it's 25 boxes, I have no clue because this is new. They don't have to go through planning commission, through the council. They can build. So that's my fear, is that I don't think there's a thorough understanding of what what opposition to having a discussion about objective design standards is, because it's having a discussion about what that actually means, and it means we have less oversight.
Yeah.
And that's the concern that I have, and I think that's the concern that the community, who has said we don't want stack and packs, which I don't want either. I campaigned against that. Because I live there. I mean, that's part of my community too.
You have a stake in it.
Yeah. And so, thoughtful growth is fine, but I just am trying to really say, I hear you, but these objective design standards will pretty much negate all of our oversight and input as to what can be built there and where. So that's sort of the challenge.
Is it sort of like coupled too with the sense of loss of control that's already coming because of the state's push for affordable housing, that you already have like the state sort of bills like SB 9 and 10, you sort of have the state already like asserting its control over local jurisdictions, and these standards just kind of add to that? Is that kind of
I think that's part of it. I mean, I think I have a little graph here that talks about the population of Carlsbad is about 115,000. We have almost 45,000 housing units, and 4.7 of that, affordable rental, 2,000 units. Compare that to our next likely city, Vista, 101,000 people, 740 rental units. We're 4.7% of total housing. We're doing a good job of meeting those numbers. The thing is, if you don't do that, the state comes in and says, you didn't do what you were supposed to do, now we're going to tell you how to do it. Right? So then we lose even more control. And I'm a local control person, so it's like, well, we need to comply with what the state is saying.
So we don't lose more control.
Correct.
Yeah.
But how do we do that without making everybody mad that, doesn't... And it's my job. I think it's my job, and I even said this in the article. Probably could have explained this a little better for people to understand that I'm not trying to take power or oversight away from the community. I'm trying to make you aware that if this objective design standard thing goes through, then we're going to have less oversight.
Sure. On the topic of local control, there's sort of a school of thought that says, that that local jurisdiction should, be pushing back, that we should be sort of pushing back against Sacramento. And one of the ways to do that is, coming in 2024, we might have a new initiative on the ballot, Our Neighborhood Voices, which would actually give local municipalities like Encinitas, like Carlsbad, the ability to essentially overturn SB 9 and 10 and sort of reassert local control. And I'm just curious to hear, do you support that initiative, or how do you think that a local jurisdiction can effectively fight back against unrealistic?
Well, you're going to have to tell me it's a state law. So tell me how a local jurisdiction overturns a state law. We would have to have a voter initiative, but also just like Prop 47 and 57, where we've tangled and trapped the law enforcement to be able to do their job with these ridiculous notions of you can't arrest somebody unless they steal $950 worth or whatever. Now there's currently legislation working through where they will lower that to $450, which will, I guess, help out Louis Vuitton, but I don't know about mom and pop drugstore. So ballot initiatives are very expensive. We can get it done, we can do it, but they're very expensive. The best thing to do is elect people to go to Sacramento that reflect your values of local control and less government. That's the best thing to do. Because there's been a supermajority in Sacramento for so many years that it's lost on them what it actually means to live in a local community. They don't think about it. Republican bills don't even get read a lot of times. They don't even consider them a lot of times. You know why? Because they don't have to.
Yeah.
So I think the best solution is to look to them to say, we need to do better. Because people in the local communities complain, and then I who's in Sacramento making this happen? Did you vote for that person?
Sure.
Because that's the problem, is they're mandating everything at this level. SB 9 and 10 is a disaster. It's a disaster for so many different reasons. We don't have infrastructure. I could build 6 multiplexes on my property in Carlsbad. We don't have the infrastructure for parking, for sewage, for wastewater, for any of that electricity. Well, maybe SDG&E probably could swing that, but we don't have the infrastructure to make that happen. So I think of it like this. Those folks in Sacramento, they don't live in these communities. They don't think 10, 15, 20 years down the road. They think, how can I get a win legislatively? Mm-hmm. Don't care what happens to the people. Don't care. I just want to win legislatively. And they can go very rogue because they have the support of a supermajority. And that's not to say I don't think robust debate and disagreeing with people, coming to common ground is a really important part of democracy, because I think it is. But it's to say we're being treated as if you don't like my idea, doesn't matter. I'm going to shut you down because we have the supermajority. We have the numbers, so it doesn't matter. So there's no real discussion about what are the implications. It's what I call umbrella leadership. What works in Carlsbad doesn't necessarily work in Encinitas. Definitely what works in Carlsbad doesn't work in Chula Vista. Mm-hmm. I mean, we have very dichotomous relationships in some terms. But what works for people works for 90% of the people, because 90% of us probably have the same issues.
Sure.
So, get down to policy, talk about policy. Don't talk about your feelings or your emotions. Just talk about policy and how they affect people. And I think that's been lost in Sacramento for so many years. It might be a little bit before we get it back.
Hey there, San Diego. If you're on the hunt for a way to enhance your health, I have a great recommendation for you. Dorado Nutrition is a company that's all about helping people live their best lives through top-notch American-made supplements. Their expert team has crafted products to support a variety of health needs, from weight management to muscle building and more. And with ingredients like Vidosia agrestis and Tonkat Ali, praised by a well-known neurobiologist seen on the Joe Rogan podcast, these supplements could be just what you need to reach your health goals. And for a limited time, you can get 25% off your purchase by using promo code SD2023 at checkout. So if you're looking for a way to improve your health, Dorado Nutrition might just be the solution you need.
Yeah. Where is Carlsbad at, by the way, in terms of meeting states' affordable housing mandates? How on track is the city right now? Encinitas is pretty off track, and there's a lot of conversations over how to get back on track. But how does Carlsbad sort of right now fit in with the state's mandated goals?
Yeah, we are. That's the wrong little graph. We have this great little HHS at a glance. We have 2,800 affordable housing units, and we've invested $52 million into this. 15% of new units are set aside as affordable. I definitely have this beautiful little graph on it and can share it with you. Our Housing and Homeless Services Department does a great job of making sure that we meet those numbers, because we don't want to be penalized. We don't want them to have more control. Yeah. So we're working our tails off to get that done. Additionally, the city does have pre-existing affordable housing and things like that are not part of the RENA numbers. But we feel like we're on track. I definitely think there are 200 more affordable units in process. So we're working toward getting to that goal, whereas some cities, I think, are kind of sitting on their hands or twiddling their thumbs about it because they don't have a housing element or a master plan or a general plan. You know what I mean? Sure. They need these kind of things to make sure, especially with Carlsbad, we have 40% open space that's preserved in our city. So, excuse me, my biggest fear is that the state will come to say, oh, by the way, we don't care about your open space anymore. Now we're going to take that. Yeah. So we have to just be cognizant of those things and think about the future, not just what is happening right now in this moment. And boy, that's one of the things that I think has been lost on in District 1, where my district is, for a little while, because we just didn't have someone in there that was going to fight for what was right for our community. It was about what was right politically. So there's a saying. Ideological. Yeah, there's a saying in our chamber. What's popular in Carlsbad is not always the best thing to do. What's the best thing to do is not always the popular thing to do. And I summarize that, but it's basically saying that. And those are the decisions that are hard to make, from the dais. Think about that roundabout we talked about a minute ago. I mean, that's not an easy decision to make, because you can look at every study in the world and see that roundabout would move people more efficiently than a traffic light. That's what they do. Yeah. But do they move people safely and all of that? And if the community is saying, no, I don't want it, why would we not try the alternative, and then if we see the success of a roundabout, for example, there's one going into the south at Cannon. If we see the success of that one, then why won't we revisit this intersection and maybe change things at a different time?
Sure.
But I don't think there's an urgency on that issue that we need to just say, oh, it's a roundabout or nothing. You know, we have alternatives.
Wow. What so in terms of talking about affordable housing, you know, the thing that always comes up in this conversation is homelessness, because California for a while now has sort of employed the housing first approach to homelessness.
You gotta love that.
And that's obviously part of the push behind these numbers coming from the state.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about homelessness for a minute. So there was a point in time count that was released last year that showed that homelessness overall in the county had increased by about 10%. In some areas it was higher, some areas it was lower. Encinitas, for instance, our homelessness rate increased by about 74% since 2020. Quite a jump. But in Carlsbad, the city has come up with an assessment of homelessness that actually differs from the point in time count's own assessment of homelessness. But I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on what you think like the most accurate perception of the homelessness rate is in Carlsbad. What's the perception versus the reality, and sort of what are your what factors into those numbers? Like what is the real number?
So I was at the point in time count this year, and did the count in my district. The fact of the matter is we're never going to have a finite number of how many homeless people there are in any given regional jurisdiction. It can't happen because they're homeless. They travel from place to place, night to night, sometimes day to day. I think that using that as a metric to base, huge amounts of dollars and giant budgets is really short-sighted, because we know people experience homelessness for multiple reasons, right? They lost their job, they may live paycheck to paycheck, they may have mental illness, they may have mental illness and addiction, they may have addiction, they may have parents that beat them and they moved out. I mean, there's a myriad of reasons people can be homeless. And it looks like from our housing and homeless department and that's their goal, is to house homeless people. And I have so much to say about this because I'm a mental health therapist, and we've got a project in Carlsbad. And anyway, so hopefully we'll have a little bit of time. But we housed 62 people last year. If you look at the budget for the homeless department, which, by the way, wasn't in our budget 5 years ago, it's a relatively new line item. It's between $4.5 to $5 million a year. If you just divide that, you're over $77,000 per person to house one person.
Wow.
That is taxpayer money. It's a lot of money. And when I dig into the budget, I see that we're paying $315,000 to social workers, two social workers. We're paying $140,000 to one benefit specialist. Those are people that fill out applications to get SSA, SSI, whatever application you need filled out. If you can complete a college application, you can be that person. It's pretty much that. At $140,000. Wow. I saw that we paid the Urban Corps $100,000 to go clean up encampments, which, by the way, are mostly on NCTD property, but they just don't clean up their stuff.
Yeah, basically for the city.
Yeah, so we end up having that. But do you know there were only 50 incidences of that? So those Urban Corps people were being paid $2,000 per incident to go out and clean those encampments up in Carlsbad. We don't have encampments like you see in San Diego. No. Why? I was not there when this department was put together, but why in the world are we not doing on an as-needed basis on some of this stuff? I could not tell you. Contact basis, as-needed basis. There should be no contract for someone to fill out application. There should be no contract for Urban Corps. There should be no contract for a social worker. So those are all hits to our budget. Like I said, $4.5 to $5 million. Just take a wild guess about how much of that is grant money. Wild guess.
Grant money you mean from the state?
Or the feds.
Or from the feds?
Or from the county, for that matter.
$1 million.
$349,000. So we, from our general fund, are funding this whole department. Okay?
Yeah.
It would be great if we look back and we say, well, there were 2,000 contacts, independent contacts with homeless people in Carlsbad, and we housed 1,500 of them. Wow. Amazing. Then we did a good job. Mm-hmm. We're spending that much money in housing 62 people in permanent housing or shelters. In fact, I have that little number too. And I think we can do better. That's the wrong thing. We housed, 62 people, like I said.
Last year.
Mm-hmm. Cleaned up 50 encampments and 749 unduplicated contacts. So that means a homeless individual can contact the department multiple times. We don't keep counting that same person. So these are 749 unduplicated contacts. It's probably more around the lines of 1,500 or so, because those are people that contacted, right? Or we made contact with.
And obviously not everyone's going to contact.
Right, and we're not going to contact everyone. So there are other people roaming around out there, and that's fine. But we have to recognize there are people that want help and people that don't want help. And I think the philosophy right now is to hold their hand and meet them where they are and carry them through this process. And I don't necessarily have a problem with that because I am a mental health therapist and that's what I do and practice. I have a problem with it what about the metrics for success? The only metric that we're seeing is the number housed.
Yeah, but there's a lot more to it than that. There's like outcomes, like beyond simply being housed, putting someone behind a door. It's like what happens to them after that? What's the follow through? How does that person's what is that going on in that person's life? Like, does putting them behind that door actually, solve their problems?
Right, and 9 times out of 10 it doesn't because they don't have the skill set they need to actually maintain a household, daily living skills and things like that. But I will also say, we provide so many services in Carlsbad. Mm-hmm. It's so much so that when I was doing the point in time count, the officer that was with me said, people are telling their buddies in Escondido to come to Carlsbad because we offer so many services. Well, that's great, but it's not fixing the problem. If we were offering these services and it was actually fixing the problem, I would say, let's pour more money into it. It's working. But what we're doing isn't necessarily working. And I want to touch on one thing. In my district, we have a development called Windsor Point, it's a beautiful, amazing building. But it was the first in its type partnering with the County of San Diego to build a housing for severely mentally ill, very low income, and veterans. And there's actually 2 sister projects. One's on one street, one's on the other. One project is behind like a shopping center, Smart and Final, Denalt's Hardware, that kind of place. It backs up to the interstate. The other one is across the street from a park with ball fields and very near to a school and also the senior center. Mm-hmm. Well, and again, this was before me, but what we were sold in this project was to have on-site security, on-site behavioral health, and supposedly Carlsbad got to have preference, at least for our veterans, to go into one of those things. Well, that's not happening. It's the first of its type from the county, and it's a complete disaster. PD has been called there, Carlsbad PD has been called there like over 200 times. It's a locked facility, so they don't have access. PD doesn't have access to get in there to respond to who's calling them.
Emergencies. And
it's very frustrating for them because they want to help,
Yeah.
And
they meet a locked door every time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they have to depend on this like roving security guy to come by because he goes between both of the locations. So my point is, we're talking about meeting regional housing affordability numbers, right? Mm-hmm. Which these projects, again, beautiful developments. It's a darn shame that they've turned out like this. I don't think any city in their right mind would enter into a contract with the county with the outcomes that we've had at Windsor Point. It would not behoove those cities to do that because they didn't follow through with what they said they were going to do. The behavioral health is literally from Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. I'm a therapist. Episodes don't usually occur during business hours if you're going to have a major mental breakdown.
Yeah.
The security, I said, is roving from one place to the other. The access is very limited, and Carlsbad did not get preference on who we could place there. And you can't discriminate, obviously, but the county decided we're going to put these people here, and we're going to pull them from here and here and there. It's not ideal. It's a disaster. And again, I think we didn't have someone in District 1 that would say, wait a minute, this doesn't sound right. You're telling me that we're getting one thing and then we're actually seeing another thing. So obviously I'm going to follow through on this and try to get, if we could get access to the building, that would be fantastic. So police could and fire could respond. And fire does, but we can't share those things with each other because fire's a different little beast. But do what you said you're going to do. I mean, I don't think that's really hard. It seems like you opened with politicians, and I think of myself as the farthest thing from a politician because I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I'm a business owner. I have a little bit of a skill set in my background, but I just want to represent the voices of the village and the barrio in District 1 who have not been heard for so long, really neglected. I'm one of them. I know what it feels like. Yeah. So, and I have no intention of going on like, Blake Spear did and
pursuing higher office.
Yeah. Horvath and all that. I have no intention of doing any of that stuff.
Do you, one important part of your background I want to bring in here is your background as a mental health counselor. All right, I already know the answer to this question. Do you have opinions about the way that the city and the county, because when we're talking about homelessness, we've been talking about it from the housing standpoint for the most part so far, but in terms of the mental health aspect of homelessness, the substance abuse aspect of homelessness, tell me some of your opinions about the way that the city and the county as a whole deals with mental health treatment of its homeless population.
I'm really glad you asked me that question because I don't agree with Gavin Newsom on pretty much anything, except maybe I would like the food of the French Laundry. I'm not sure because I can afford to go there. But I do think that the CARE Act is probably going to be a benefit to folks who cannot make decisions for themselves because they are under the thrones of addiction and mentally ill. For me, I recognize that it does take a multidisciplinary approach to not just address those individuals, but to put them into a higher level of functioning. That's the whole goal. It's not necessarily to give them a house, a $950,000 condo or apartment, and call that good. Boom, boom, got you shelter, we're good. It doesn't necessarily work because I think I mentioned earlier, if you don't have skills of daily living, that place is going to end up like a ghetto because you don't know how to. You don't have those skills. So I worked many years ago in in-home treatment for people kids that were at risk of going into state custody, or they had just been reunited with their families either due to delinquency, abuse, neglect, et cetera, et cetera. And it was an intensive in-home therapy program. We went to their homes 2 hours a day, 5 days a week for 1 month. That was in the ghettos of Memphis, Tennessee. I don't know if you noticed, but I'm white. And it was a heavily black population, and I've been called snowflake for a bazillion times every time I go in there. But it worked because what we did was we did intensive therapy for 2 hours a day for 30 days, but we also had weekly multidisciplinary team meetings. So that would be, a police officer, a psychiatrist, me, therapist, caseworker. We put the people together, put the heads together to figure out what works for that person, that family. And I think that's what's missing from, not only are we wasting taxpayer money with the Housing First project, but I think that's what's missing is the humanity part about it. I've heard so much compassion, compassion, compassion. It is not compassionate to set someone up for failure. And that's what it does. So I want to set people up for success. And I think that's what our Housing and Homeless Department wants to do. Again, I said this was not a budget line 5 years ago, so it's all new to them too, right? So we have to make some adjustments, potentially make some changes to really affect positive change and get these people at a higher level of functioning at the end rather than where they are. And my number one goal right now is to clean up Pine Park in the village. That's where the homeless people are living. That's where they're congregating. And it's at, baseball fields, soccer fields, lacrosse fields, the senior center, and a tot playground. So this is not, and a community garden. So this is not where we want to see that population, but it's also not okay for them to be there. It's not humane. It's not altruistic to say, I'm going to give you a tent and be done with you. That's not what this society that I believe in is still about.
Yeah.
I think we can do a better job. And the county response is, let me give you some vouchers to stick them in a hotel room. The residents' response to that is, we've seen increased police activity and drug needles and things like that around these voucher programs. And the council's response is, let me go talk to county. So it's like it's like we're in the cycle of victimization almost, just like they're living in a cycle of homelessness. It's like, okay, we keep going around in circles about this, but really, what's it going to take? And I think it takes a compassionate approach, a humane approach, and recognizing, do you want help or do you not? If you don't want help, it doesn't give you permission to sleep at Pine Park, to drink during the day, or ever at the park, to loiter in the bathroom, and it's kind of personal. I have 2 teenage boys that practice there that I say, don't go to the bathroom while you're there.
Yeah.
In Carlsbad, California. It's pretty remarkable. And we don't do the thing where we just pick them up and take them somewhere else. We don't do that.
Yeah.
So we do try to be we are a full service city, and we do try to apply that in this situation as well. And I think that presents us with some unique challenges and also opportunities. Sometimes I think it's a little bit weird that most of the police officers know the troublemaker homeless people by name. There might be something wrong with that model. If I'm a police officer and I know you as a homeless troublemaker by name, perhaps we should be doing something a little bit differently.
Yeah, but for you, it's not just about enforcement. It's about rethinking our conceptual approach, because sort of this housing first mindset at the state level, it sounds like, is being felt and borne out at the local level, at the county level, and at the city level. And for you, it's like, let's look at these more fundamental underlying factors behind homelessness, not just lock it behind a door.
Yeah.
But so for you, yes, there isn't like an enforcement element to it, but it's also more about like rethinking our conceptual approach as well.
Yeah, and I think that means we do provide the services that they're willing to take, but we also say, you can't stay here if you're not going to abide by the rules.
Sure.
And that's almost what you would describe maybe as tough love. And it's really hard to do that. And I don't think people enjoy it, but I do know that there's great benefit to it. Again, I even tell my kid, I don't want to say no to you, but you haven't done your homework, kind of thing. I don't want to say no to you, but you haven't shown me that you can hold a job. So how do I know if you're going to be able to pay rent or whatever,
Sure.
So it's accepting consequences of your behaviors, and we are growing rapidly into a society where there are no consequences for behaviors, and that's just really leads to a bit of mayhem.
Sure. I mean, it sounds like what you're advocating for is sort of this approach of like incentives for people to not be homeless. Like you don't want people to be in a position where it's like, hey, this is what I do, this is what I'm comfortable doing, I'm comfortable living this way. It's like you want an incentive structure that pushes them out of that position.
It's funny that you said that, because when I did the point in time count, there was a man that was living in his vehicle, and he was a retiree, got his Social Security check, and lives in his car in Carlsbad, California. He's happy as a lark. And I walked away from that encounter thinking, how do you get to that headspace? There has to be something else there to get to that in your head, to think that this is awesome. I'm living in my car.
Living our best life.
Someone's knocking on my door at 3 a.m. to count me as a homeless individual. So it's a systemic, it's a systemic problem, but sometimes I think government has the greatest of intentions. Like I remember former President Trump saying, I'm going to send social workers in with police officers. And I thought, oh my gosh, that is a horrible, horrible idea on so many different levels. Namely, police are intent on de-escalating and mitigating a circumstance that's happening in seconds sometimes. Why would we have Joe social worker there to distract police and maybe add another layer of uncertainty to a situation that may have been pretty certain before you went in there, but then you don't know what this person's going to do as a social worker because they're not trained in tactics or de-escalation or anything. They're social workers. And I think government sometimes has a tendency to throw resources at things, but the resources don't make sense. Mm-hmm. It's like throwing a rescue ring in an ocean to someone that's in a wading pool. You don't do that. You just pick them up and get them out of the wading pool.
Yeah.
So it's sometimes really over compensating, and it doesn't make sense. Like the compensation makes no sense.
The resources don't match the situation.
Yeah.
Yeah. In addition to being a council member, though, you are now, as I mentioned in the introduction, on the SANDAG board.
Yes,
and
good stuff.
You have a pretty prominent role there because, I mean, SANDAG is responsible for essentially overseeing transit infrastructure for all of San Diego. And one thing that has come up in the past year or so since I've been reporting in San Diego is questions about how SANDAG functions institutionally. Mm-hmm. So in 2022, there was an audit of credit card purchases by the staff at SANDAG that showed questionable and improper spending of taxpayer money. And there was also a whole controversy over questionable contracts with vendors of funds exceeding $200+ million.
Yeah.
Essentially, these contracts with vendors that were called into question of how the money was being handled with the contracts. So I want to talk a bit about, so institutionally, you campaigned obviously for this position, but now that you're on the board of SANDAG, sort of what are you seeing and learning as far as how SANDAG functions as an institution and sort of what needs to be fixed?
Before I got elected, and definitely before I got appointed to this board, I thought it was a bureaucratic red tape. Mm-hmm. I feel like we should be able to not have a middleman determine where our money is spent on roads and improvements to infrastructure and transportation. After being elected and also fighting against the mileage tax, which would disproportionately affect residents in Carlsbad because we travel to work, we commute to work, and it doesn't make any sense to say that we're going to disproportionately affect you while you're contributing $15.8 billion to the economy. That's what we contribute in Carlsbad. Having now been to a meeting at the dais, not just there observing the craziness, I think it's pretty enlightening. I did have an exchange with the executive director regarding transportation, the stopover of buses that they're proposing in San Diego. There's already been $18 million spent for a parcel of the property. We need to buy the other parcel, according to him, to complete this project, which would be a stopover. So buses, like the transit, MTS type buses, they need a place to stop and have their lunch and use the restroom and all that kind of stuff. So, you think of it as like a arch or, rectangle, whatever, and the buses will go under and they'll have their space. And then he said, maybe we'll put the SANDAG offices above that. And then, possibilities, we could do apartments, something like that, above it. So in my mind, I'm like, rewind, what did he just say? Mm-hmm. Apartments over a bus stopover. I don't know that would go over too well. So I had this, little exchange of, he's telling me, he's dressing me down pretty good. We will have a stopover, there's not debatable, it's not questionable. I was never questioning that, by the way. And that's just that. And I said, okay, understood. Sounds like to me you think it's okay or amenable. People will want to live in apartments above a bus stopover, Okay. And he said, well, we'll decide later. and I'm getting to the answer of your question. We'll decide later, what we do with this stopover. But right now we have to purchase this stuff, and we've got to get this done. I said, okay, well, we just don't have those issues in Carlsbad. Our buses pull over on the side, they do their stuff, and they move on about their business. We just don't have that issue. So I think you can probably acknowledge and agree with me that there are different transportational needs based on the geographical area. And he said, yes, right? So I said, okay, great. Roll back the film. I went back to look at something, another exchange with one of my colleagues about a different topic, but the very next topic was that. So I was like, oh, I should look at this and remember what he actually said to me. There's no film. It's gone. My 45-second exchange regarding recognizing there's different transportational needs based on regions is gone. I'm looking at okay, what's moving? The clock is moving, but there's no film. Then it picks right back up as soon as the next topic comes up, because that was the very end of the discussion of that topic.
Interesting.
So it moves on. I'm like, well, that's curious. So my answer to your question is, it seems a bit dysfunctional, like a big dysfunctional family. We're looking at Chula Vista and San Diego with the weighted vote, which if people want to know and understand what that means, it means that based on population, you get a heavier vote count than your other. It's not based on anything that you contribute or bring to the table. It's based on population, bodies alone. Granted, not all of those bodies use public transit. Granted, not all of those bodies pay taxes. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Just bodies, warm bodies. So we in Carlsbad and in North County and in East County, I would say, we get the short end of the stick on all of that because we don't have the population. Forget about if we have the contribution to the economy. The contribution as taxpayers to making those projects work that they deem appropriate. And finally, this weekend is the SANDAG retreat, which is a planning time for the board, and it should be interesting to see what the goals are other than this stopover for buses in downtown. Apparently SANDAG is kind of intent on going back 100 years instead of moving forward to the future. They really like putting people in buses and putting people in trains. And I remember watching the Jetsons as a kid and thinking that was going to be my lifetime when we saw these flying little things, and we weren't going to have to drive anymore. I mean, I was a very little kid, right? But I remember seeing that, thinking that's going to happen in my lifetime. Well, the goal of this entity is really to go back to trains and buses and get us out of our cars and into mass transit. Unfortunately, in Carlsbad, we don't have the density to support that mode of transportation. And by the way, some of the people proposing that type of thing, they don't have kids that play sports. They don't go to Costco. They're used to metropolitan life. New York is great. I love New York. Minneapolis, great. You can go all through the tunnels and everything, get around.
But we don't have that kind of density here.
But we don't. And guess what? We don't want it. So that's why, come full circle, that's why local control is so important, because we don't want it. We need to maintain local control. But also, we do have some infrastructure needs. I find it so ironic that they're trying to get us out of our cars, but they're building extra lanes on the 5 in North County. It's like, what?
What are you doing?
But then they're talking about, the mileage tax, oh, don't worry, we're going to pay for it with a mileage tax. They're going to charge us per mile to travel on the roads that we already pay for. And by the way, they're going to track it. So that's why it's called tax and track.
Yeah.
They're going to put some device in our vehicles to track us everywhere we go.
Seems invasive.
Oh, you think? I think it's just unconstitutional, but that is, it's a big overstep. I don't think people in their right minds would say, oh, that's a good idea. But then again, I think 2% of the people said that the mileage tax was a good idea. I'm like, who are those 2%? I need to talk to them. Who wants to be taxed more in California?
Do you feel like the weighted vote essentially creates this dynamic on the SANDAG board where you have this majority-minority sort of dynamic that just is totally skewing decision making?
Yeah, and it actually happened in front of me when they were doing the voting for the executive committee. Mayor Rebecca Jones of San Marcos put up Terry Gasterlin from Solana Beach as a second vice chair, and nominated her as a second vice chair. She passed that tally vote, and all the chair did after the director told her was, okay, we'll call for the weighted vote. She passed the tally vote and won the seat. They called for the weighted vote. She lost. So it's an example of an abuse of power to some extent, and I don't know how we rein in that. I think they're not out of conformity with law, but I think certainly ethically it's not the right thing to do. And all they're doing is trying to get theirs for them. And that's it's called a San Diego regional thing, so let's act like that.
So with the improper employee spending, with the contracts with vendors that are out of control.
Don't forget the auditor remember the auditor that brought up all of the improper spending?
Yeah.
Yeah, now they're gonna hire an outside auditor, I guess.
So essentially getting rid of her because they didn't like what she had to say.
Yeah.
Is that kind of the...
That's what I'm understanding.
Yeah, and then the second part of her audit, by the way, I think is coming out in April. But is there a way to sort of like fix those issues institutionally, or do you think that it's just difficult to do that with like the weighted vote and just sort of the way that things are now? Like, how do you sort of fix these like cultural issues within SANDAG itself with the way money is handled?
You know what you do is you talk to someone across the table and you have a conversation. And I think, understanding that there are needs, there are regional needs for everybody has needs.
Yeah.
But equity is a big thing right now. And they're going against every bit of that by denying us in North and East County our fair share of anything. So if you really believe in the policy that you're pushing and the reason you're pushing it, then abide by your own principles. And I think that is just out of bounds for them. I think it is all about an agenda. So this weekend will be interesting during the retreat to see a little bit more of the personality, I think, of the board. Granted, I've been to several meetings, but sat into one. So it will be a learning curve. That's why I'm devoting my time to it, because I plan to be where I am. I hope to be where I am for a long time, and can get the intricacies and pass that along to North County and how we need to stand up for what we have paid into. We're not even asking for something that is not our fair share. Mm-hmm. We're not being unreasonable. They're being unreasonable because they're saying we don't care, just like Sacramento is saying to us with regards to our numbers, our arena numbers.
Yeah. With time being what it is, I want to wrap up, but any final thoughts as far as either sort of the future of SANDAG, or just going back to our conversation at the beginning, sort of your own goals for office, or even your time in SANDAG?
Yeah, no, I think as far as goals for District 1, we want to clean up Pine Park. We want to provide a safe community, render it safe and sound for people to come there, not only for residents, but for visitors. We want to provide, additional lighting in the village and barrio where people are not feeling safe going out at night in Carlsbad, California. I can't fathom it in my own mind, but I do understand it because we have about 25% of our total population is elderly seniors. Mm-hmm. And just so you know, they've decided that 50 is the new senior number in Carlsbad, and I'm pretty offended by that because I'm over 50. Render it safe, make sure we have the proper lighting, make sure we have the resources we need to do the things that we need to do to get those things done, which we do. And also thinking outside of the box on how to solve problems. One of the things that is so important is workforce housing. And teachers, employees of the city, and police and fire, and those things are also on my radar of things that we need to really explore creative ways of fixing, and we can talk about that another time because I do have some ideas about that. But and then following through with what I said, we voted the first meeting. It was just whatever. Oh, it was me voting against a police oversight commission. The second meeting, it was these committee assignments. And I remember two of the people, it was a 2-2 council at that time, and two of the people did not want to support our mayor on SANDAG, and I didn't really understand why, but okay. When we finally put someone in to that position, now it's a 3-2 vote. I wasn't expecting to be the SANDAG nominee. I was expecting the mayor to be it, because that's typically what happens. And so when Mayor Blackburn said, I'd really like to nominate Melanie because she's going to be here. There were a couple girls in the council that decided, of my colleagues that decided they wanted to have the brand new person that was literally appointed 20 seconds before consider being appointed to SANDAG. A person that I don't know if she's ever been to a SANDAG meeting before, or really understands the commitment that it takes or whatever. I saw it as bullying. That's how I saw it. What they were doing is sort of bullying, and I didn't really appreciate that. She defaulted to the mayor. The mayor said, I'd really like to have Melanie because, number one, this appointed person isn't going to, she would do a fine job. She's not going to be able to run for the seat because that's part of our municipality code. And she's not going to be in office after 2 years. So why would we want someone to go down and learn everything they can about SANDAG and affect positive change?
Only to get them out of there.
Yeah. So that was a great point, one I hadn't thought of. But that's sort of how it fell and how I ended up there. And my commitment is to that. And I might drive them crazy a little bit with asking questions, but I'm new. That's what happens,
It's your job.
I'm new. And I can play that. I could also play I'm a dumb blonde, but I'm not. But I just go with I'm new. So it's kind of fun to be in that position, but also, and I don't have the roadmap, Steve, to fix all of SANDAG's problems. I have integrity and I have honesty and I have a good faith of representation from Carlsbad to SANDAG, and that's what I have. So I'm not going to go in there guns a-blazing and try to clean house. It's not my style, first of all. But I think you get more with honey than vinegar, and I definitely want to lean into those conversations that may be difficult, that they may not want to have, but sort of figure out a way, well, you may not want to talk about that, but we have to.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I'm new, I have questions, and it sounds like there's a bit of a learning curve with SANDAG too.
Absolutely,
And so, I appreciate that you're not trying to like clean house first day, but it's more of like, what can we think about a little differently, like new perspective, not an echo chamber, but sort of that diversity of thought approach. So, but in any case, we got to wrap up there, but thanks so much for coming on, Melanie. I appreciate your time. Again, this is our first Carlsbad episode, but I'm sure we'll have more, so hope you come back on the show.
I'd be happy to.
But I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Of course, thank you.
All right, guys.
This has been another recorded episode of Stay Classy San Diego with your host, Steve Wire. Thanks again to our sponsors, MaxLux Media at maxluxmedia.com and Dorado Nutrition at doradonutrition.com. And thanks to all of our listeners for tuning into the show. See you next time. Stay classy, San Diego.